Hi there, welcome to episode 336 of Kodsnack. My name is Fredrik and I have a cold, but fortunately this episode was recorded a few days before, so I think I sound a bit better there than I do now. And in this episode I talked to Paul Frazee, who's a developer on the Beaker browser and a thinker about how to improve and evolve the web for the future and making it more peer-to-peer and plenty of other exciting stuff. I think it's a great discussion. It gave me a lot of new ideas and I hope it will inspire you too. And of course, links to everything we talk about are in the show notes for the episode in your podcast player right now or at kodsnack.se/336. Enjoy. All right. Welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Thank you.
Who are you and what do you do?
So my name is Paul Frazee. I work on the Beaker browser, which is a sort of experimental browser trying to move to the next version of the web.
Yeah, it's one of those small little things.
Yeah, just a little hobby project.
Yeah. So how did you sort of what was your path to Beaker?
Well, it's started as a project about 3 years ago. Before that, I worked on a project called Secure Scuttlebutt, which is a sort of a peer-to-peer distributed social network.
Oh.
And, you know, it's been maybe like 7 or 8 years kind of in this space of P2P and web decentralization. And it just seemed like the interesting thing to get into back when I got started about 7 or 8 years ago. So just been at it for a while, trying out different stuff, and Beaker is the latest.
That's yeah, it's a pretty natural evolution that way, I guess.
Yeah.
So Beaker it's using Electron, is it? Or and
yeah, that's
Chromium?
right. Yep.
And what else is it built on top of?
Well, those are the core technologies that let us have a browser.
Yeah.
And then the tech that we use to build out the sort of interesting additional technologies is called Hyperdrive. Which has been part of the DAT protocol project. And so Hyperdrive is a kind of a peer-to-peer file system, which we use in a lot of different ways, both as like a kind of a personal file system, but also as a way to have websites or even kind of different sorts of applications where you, instead of having a database that you run on a server, we use these hyperdrives and you just store all your data as files.
And peer-to-peer then.
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly.
Hyperdrive is built on the DAT protocol.
Yeah, the DAT protocol is kind of like a catch-all term for all the different pieces of Hyperdrive. So yeah, you can kind of use them interchangeably.
Okay. And the DAT protocol has been around for since 2013 or something like that?
That sounds about right. It's kind of gone through some progression. So It started out very different. It wasn't a protocol at first. It was a tool for people to work with data, kind of like Git. Yeah, very, very different.
Yes.
It was the idea was, okay, we have all these people working in cities or in academia, and they have a need for sharing data, managing versions of data, and originally the thought was, okay, like tabular data, like CSVs. And so we'll make DAT, which is like the Git for data. Mm-hmm. And so interestingly, that got grant funded. It was created under a nonprofit. They took it to some people who tried it out. And one of the things they were told in response was, love the idea, but we don't actually use tabular data that often. And if they were, it would be in some kind of a database that was, like a SaaS product or something. So what they said in response was, look, we like a lot of the idea here, but we just use files. And academia, for instance, we have these giant kind of blobs that are a custom binary format that some engineer wrote at some point in the lab. So, CSV just doesn't even come close to cutting it for us. But if you could help us manage and move files between devices, number one, so you're on the field, you need to be able to synchronize files between devices. And then number two, if you could help us keep our files online after I've left the university, so that I'm not just hoping the university's IT department keeps my website where I publish all my research online.
Oh, yeah. Makes sense.
Right? Yeah, the kind of the link rot problem as academia sees it. If you could solve that, now you'd be onto something. So they took that feedback and said, okay, well, you know what that sounds like? That sounds like what they want is something like BitTorrent, but a little bit better. And so that's kind of what they did. They ended up getting connected with Matthias Booz, who is now the head of the protocol development. And he had been working on peer-to-peer technology for a while, a lot of it actually with BitTorrent, making interesting kind of algorithms on top of BitTorrent. And so he sat down and said, okay, let's make a new file system that uses a set of ideas very similar to how BitTorrent works, but kind of improves on it, makes it possible for files to change after you publish them. For instance, in BitTorrent, you make a torrent and you put it out there, and now it's kind of frozen.
Yeah.
And so with data, I was like, let's make it so you can change the files. Let's make it so you have URLs, which, you know, BitTorrent doesn't really have it has magnet links, but they're not like domains, so you can't quite share them in the same way you could a website. So with data, it was like if we create a domain for each, you know, archive of files, it kind of works like a website now and things like that. So BitTorrent upgraded is really what DAT and Hyperdrive is.
That's pretty cool. And it's starting to feel like a more natural thing to build some type of browser on top of, I guess, as well.
It was honestly, when I started Beaker, you know, about 3 years ago, I took Electron, I put a kind of a browser like Chrome on it, and I put in DAT, and within like 2 or 3 weeks of starting the project, you could browse to DAT websites. Yeah, very, very natural connection to the browser, and so that was the easy part.
Apparently,
yeah. As it turns out, the stuff that's much harder was then deciding. Okay, so you have peer-to-peer websites. How do you make applications, or how do people manage their data, things like that? That ended up being the stuff that we've been working on ever since.
Mm-hmm.
But the files, peer-to-peer file system turning into websites totally makes sense. Really easy to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just went ahead and published my own static website.
Yeah, did it work for you?
In Beaker. Yeah, and it sort of just worked, and it felt a little bit GitHub-ish or something like that.
Yeah, we took a lot of inspiration from GitHub on that version of the build for sure.
Yeah, it made a lot of sense. I mean, I could figure it out without really looking for help, so it feels like a good start there.
Yeah.
And so when I hit publish, I'm sort of adding my URL, my .dat URL, putting it out there, and everything's served from within Beaker on my machine to begin with, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. So the way this all works is that there is this network that everybody takes part in, which we call the Discovery Swarm. Mm-hmm. And just to really nerd out about it, it's what you call a distributed hash. Yeah, well, all right, we're going full in on the nerding.
Oh, yes.
Okay, great. So it's a distributed hash table is what you call this. And that's kind of a fancy way of just saying a giant key value database that a lot of people participate in.
Yep.
And so whenever you create a DAT, you contact that DHT and you add yourself. You say, I've got a new archive here. This is the address for it. Here's my IP. If you would like to access it, get in touch with me. And that's all the information that you push out to this discovery system, to the DHT.
Right.
So whenever somebody wants to access your website, they're not pulling it from the distributed network. They're actually speaking, directly to your computer. At least at first. And then after people download it, they can then choose to add themselves as well to the DHT and say, I am also serving this. You can pull the pieces down from my computer as well, just like it works in BitTorrent. And so you could think of almost like a distributed web server in a way, where everybody can participate in the sort of static file hosting, so like a distributed Apache. And that's got some interesting things about it. You can imagine it's almost like having a load balancer built into the internet, because like you could have 1 million people get into it, and then you got 1 million different servers. Yeah. So it's a nice way to reduce costs, depending. I think it'll be interesting to see how well that works out in practice, but the possibility is there, so we'll see.
So is this what should we call it, like redistribution or sharing? Is that automatic, or is it something a peer opts into?
That is a really interesting question for us, actually, and we've got a long-running GitHub issue where we debate the back and forth on this because the question you have to ask is, do I always want to rehost a website when I visit it?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the answer might be no, because on the web, you're clicking around on links. You don't always know where you're going before you get there. And you might get to something and go, oh, this is terrible. I can't believe that I just saw this, And so you hit the back button as fast as you can. You really don't want your computer to be like, hey, I'm hosting this now. Everybody come on down.
That's what I've got.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh, you don't really always want to automatically host things that you visit. So
no.
We're sort of in this process of deciding how to trade that off, and we might make it a configuration option where you choose to automatically versus potentially integrating a kind of a social contact list where you say, I want to automatically host, even if I don't visit it, I want to automatically host everything that my friend Paul posts because I like what he does and I want to help him out. So we could do kind of a social seeding system, or we are also looking at, you can set it where you don't host it by default, but you press a button and now you will host it because you want to opt in and help this website stay online. Different kinds of schemes like that. But we haven't really decided exactly which one we're going to go with. And the people that feel like we ought to automatically rehost, their basic argument is if you don't do that, then you're creating a kind of a tiering system where it's like a popularity contest and you don't want stuff to fall offline. You want to kind of make sure everything stays as available as possible. I'm not really sure I subscribe to that view as much, but I'm interested in the debate.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't even realize this before I started asking the question, but it's really a super interesting problem.
It is, and it's a pretty, hot button topic, especially in the kind of community that we operate in, where a lot of people feel like censorship is one of the main reasons for these kinds of distributed systems, is to make sure that censorship is not a problem. And I have very mixed feelings about whether or not I think that should be the top priority, but I do understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I think that we're sort of moving in interesting directions there, because it feels like there was a really long time where everyone was just shouting that everything should be like open and uncontrolled by default, and everything else was outrageous. And I think I was over there somewhere to some extent, at least for quite a while. But now it's starting to feel much more natural to really question it and really try to think through what the consequences would be and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, and because we're having to really confront some of the consequences of maximizing the reach of everything, in a very direct fashion. And so, the way I kind of see this is that if you're going to try to reduce, for instance, like iTunes removing podcasts or Twitter removing, users. If you're going to say, no, nobody can have that kind of power, then you still need to have some kind of system whereby poor behavior still gets punished. So maybe you don't want to concentrate the power to deplatform somebody in a few hands, but you still need the system to be capable of saying, this is bad, this is problematic, don't spread it. And pretty much all of the services that we're used to are not just hosting platforms, they're actually aggregators.
Yeah.
And so what's getting kind of mixed into the conversation is not just whether or not your stuff is available, but does it get pushed to a wide audience? And I can sort of see the argument that, maybe this stuff should stay available, but should it be pushed to a wide audience? Probably not. And that's sort of where I draw the line. Whether or not that's actually useful, I don't know.
No, that's sort of a separate question, really.
Yeah.
I have to start somewhere. So if I use Beaker today, can I make choices around this, or what happens currently, or is it just everything's on my machine that I share and nothing else?
The version of Beaker that is widely available right now is, first I'll just say, it's actually about a year's worth of development behind the current beta. So we've been in a kind of a heads down development process for the past year, just about. So in the version that was the last major release, it is set up so that you will automatically rehost things whenever you visit them, and that will continue until you quit the browser and restart it. So it's a very kind of simple logic that we put in there.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The policies in the next version have not actually, that's still a to-do item.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And I mean, just a simple thing as disk space might be an issue as well, really.
Yes, actually, it's a real big concern. Yeah, and whatever policy we come up with will probably work in a resource manager as a core part of it, just so that we don't overload somebody's computer. And it's not just disk space, it's also network connections and bandwidth and things like that. We just have to make sure that opening the browser doesn't become a mistake. And,
now I'm stuck for 20 minutes.
Right, exactly. Oh, I opened Beaker again.
Fools.
Yeah, don't want that to happen. So we gotta be smart about how it's designed for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my first step is that I go in, I add my site, I could sync a folder, which was really nice because it was exactly what I needed. So I synced a folder and hit the publish button, and now it's online, and it goes away then when I close my browser, unless someone else has visited and is hosting it.
That's correct.
Yeah. So what would be my natural next step if I wanted to sort of keep my thing online a bit longer? Should I move it to a different machine that's always on? Or
yeah, so we are not what I would call topological purists, which is to say that if you want to set up a service somewhere to act as a sort of a cloud peer and keep people's files online, we are completely okay with that, and we run one ourselves.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we don't actually think the distribution of devices is the most interesting property.
No.
What's interesting about it is the flexibility that is introduced whenever you can create websites and run applications without having to set up a server first.
Yeah.
So whether or not it is peer-to-peer in a kind of a perfectly distributed topology, we don't really care. You want to keep your stuff online, get a cloud service running or set up something at home or enlist your friends. You have the flexibility to do it however you like.
Yeah.
So my sort of default answer, if I'm trying to be a little less wordy to somebody, to say, just sign up for this service we've got and it'll keep your stuff online for you.
Yeah. Or I guess just start something Beaker something on a Raspberry Pi in a corner and open Beaker there as well before I close the site on my own machine, and then we'll be okay.
Yes, exactly. And that's actually, if we get the chance, I love that idea, I love the idea that you could have some awesome server just sitting in the corner, keeping all your data online, and maybe even like running other processes too. Like I'd love to have an indexer sitting there and just like actually crawling out from my data set and putting together things that I could query, finally get the home cloud idea working. That would be
exactly
fantastic. So we're trying to leave the door open to that as much as possible.
Yeah. So what's, I mean, I had a nice static site. It was really simple to get that one online. So what? How does it? How do I think about it if it comes to something more like a server application or a more dynamic website?
So we have been asking that question actively for years now, and we have gone through a number of different iterations of how to answer that question of how do you go beyond static websites to applications. And the answer is that you basically take these websites or these hyperdrives, which are basically networked folders that contain files, and you use them as databases. That's really the answer. So kind of like an RSS, right? With RSS, you're almost sort of using the website as a database where you fetch the current value of somebody's feed from their website. The exact same principle can apply here. And actually, I think when we get to the final execution of this, it becomes even less like the web and more like Unix in a way. Because what we have in the current build, what we've really moved toward is this idea of, Hyperdrive, it's the web, it runs websites and things like that. But actually, the bigger idea here is that you have a global file system. And this global file system contains all the information that anybody has published in it. And so if you want to build applications against it, you just want to read and write files against this global file system. So if I want to see what your posts are, I just need to see what files you have in your feed folder. And I pull them in and merge them together with all the posts in everybody else's feed folder that I follow. And so I'm just reading JSON files off of everybody's personal feed folder and putting them together into a feed interface. Same thing with comments or votes or tags or really anything. You're just taking everybody's personal file drives and reading and writing files, and that's how you build applications, which sort of puts it in a social design by nature, because you're choosing whose drives you want to interact with, and so you assemble a kind of a list of them, and then that's what you build your applications against.
Yeah.
So that's how we end up building dynamic applications, and as a result, you end up in a totally client-side architecture for your applications. It's sort of inverting the server-client relationship, where rather than having the servers contain all the business logic and the database logic and the network, you're moving all that into the client and making the client smart and making the server very dumb. The server is just a files kind of rehosting CDN in a way.
Oh, yeah. So if I want to do something in like I don't know what to call it, traditional server sense with updating, what I can do is write new files or update the files that I serve.
Yes. And you could write a service, for instance, that sits and watches the file system and reacts to it. So you could actually sort of abuse the file system to act as a messaging bus if you were so inclined, where anytime you wanted something to happen, you could write the file. And it's really pretty fun, because like one of the things that we're eventually going to get to is what we call multi-writer, which is the idea that more than one computer can write to a drive, which obviously you need that. And so you do that, and now imagine you attach a service with the multi-writer and say, okay, anytime I write a .md file here, run my script and output the HTML for me automatically. And now you have this giant distributed computer where you have something running in a total, way out in the cloud or in the computer next to you, doesn't matter. It's just using this shared file system to do work and to move information back and forth. And it's a really interesting architecture to build applications with.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think I've heard people setting up weird hackish solutions to achieve something like that, like using Dropbox sometime. But
right.
But it seems strange. This seems even more exciting.
Yeah, we're really pretty excited about it. One of the things that we are doing with the latest version is really leaning in to this global file system. And so one of the new features, in addition to working on a new version of the browser, we're also working on a new version of the Hyperdrive protocol. Wow. And it has a number of nice features, scales much better, for instance. So we were able to take all of Wikipedia, which is in an archive format. It is like millions of files in a single folder. It's just a crazy huge folder. And exactly. We have been able to stick the entire thing into a hyperdrive and load it from Beaker. So our scaling is looking pretty good.
Yeah.
So that's good. But the really interesting feature that we've got in there is what we call a mount, which is kind of like a symlink, but the mount can point to another drive. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, you can create these sort of arbitrary file system hierarchies by composing together multiple different hyperdrives. And we're using that as the basis of a file system that lives on the device, which is you access using navigator.filesystem, right? That's the object that your program talks to. And
we're in the browser. I forgot.
Yeah, exactly. So you have this private drive that doesn't go on the network, and that's the navigator.filesystem. It's your root drive. And that stays off. But then there's a /public, which is a mount to a public drive, which represents you. And then the public drive has a friends folder. And that is a bunch of mounts to everybody that you are kind of socially connected with. So all of my friends will mount my public drive to their public/friends drive. So if I want to build applications now, what I'll do is I'll just use this composed file system and use globbing patterns. So to assemble my feed, I'll run a query where I say, I would write a query with like a /public/feed/star, right? And that would glob fetch all of my files in my feed. And then for all my friends' feeds, it would be /public/friends**/feed**.
Oh, cool.
And then that'll give me this list of files. I sort them by creation time, render them in line, and there you go. Feed application.
And since we're inside a browser, I just do this in JavaScript in a file on my machine.
All JavaScript, all client-side JavaScript.
And I just open the console and do all this.
Yeah, and talking about a console, we're going so crazy with this thing. We put in a terminal. We've added in not just a JavaScript. Obviously DevTools has its JavaScript console, but we also have a new terminal we call Web Terminal that is like it's not Bash, but it's like Bash, that lets you interact with your file system and run applications, and you can install other people's web terminal scripts and things like that. So it's becoming actually much less of a browser at this stage and much more of a networked operating system.
Mm-hmm.
You have your own file system, and you can run applications, and you can all of your information is being stored off of this file system, and it just so happens to also navigate to websites.
Yeah, suddenly the browser is almost the least interesting part.
Almost, yeah. The way we've been talking about it now is that, you know what, the browser has always been kind of an operating system, but maybe it's a little bit broken, and so let's just make a not broken operating system. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're doing with the browser, and then with with HTTP, it's like, well, HTTP is kind of like a file system, but it's a little bit broken. So why don't we just go ahead? Yeah, exactly, just a little bit broken. The web trademark.
Ooh,
so yeah. So, why not have one that's not broken, right? Make a global file system that's not broken, and an operating system, a networked operating system that's not broken, and just work off of that. And as a result, so much of what we're doing comes from this context of trying to decentralize the web. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? Well, in my opinion, it's like bringing personal computing back to the internet, where you have files, right? And you can run applications. It's like a personal computing operating system, but web scale. And that's really where we're trying to get with the new version of Beaker, which hopefully we'll start to show to folks in the next 3 months or so.
Ooh.
Yeah. Don't hold me to that.
No. I'm a developer as well. I never would.
It's been 3 months away for, a whole year. So
yeah, for a reason. So what's... what are the largest things left to solve for this version, let's say?
Well, again, don't hold me to this, but I think we've finally kind of gotten rid of the giant question marks, which is really what has made it take so long. Because, we basically knew that we were... Let me start from the beginning of the story. At the end of last year, we managed to raise an angel round, which earned us about a year and a half of salary that we can live on. Mm-hmm. And this is myself and Matthias Booz, the creator of the DAP protocol. And so we said, all right, well, Beaker that's out right now is interesting. You can do peer-to-peer static websites, but obviously there's a lot that's missing from this. Yeah. It's really great that you can make websites more easily, but that's also kind of a served task inside the market right now. I mean, you look at now.sh or Netlify, it's like, what are we going to do better than they do? So we needed to move it forward. So we went heads down and actually spent a lot of time with the expectation that sort of generic tools for building applications were entirely in user land was semi-infeasible at this stage. Mm-hmm. We spent some time trying to do it. But ultimately what we started to think was, well, in order to make like a Twitter clone, you need to be able to run these queries across the file system that you created, where you could say, give me all my friends, give me all the comments they've made on this particular post, things like that. And the expectation was that requires pre-computed indexes, that you have to have some process that sits there and watches the file system and crunches together all these indexes. Yeah. And so we put a whole lot of work into that, created something called the Unwalled Garden, which is our sort of protocol for social applications on the DAT web. And got almost all the way to an endpoint with that, and then stopped and said, we don't really love it. Because this approach that we had taken was just so rigid, because the browser itself it was having built-in semantics put into it, where it would understand certain kinds of files, it would understand comments and status updates and friends and things like that. And that was cool, and we exposed it as an API that you could, write applications against, but it was so rigid that at the end of the day, it felt like, okay, what we had done is built a browser with sort of a peer-to-peer social network built in, which is just only so interesting. It was burying the lead in a way. And so we stepped back and said, what would be more interesting is if we really brought the files out to the forefront and sort of got back to this personal computing idea. Where instead of making files in all the Hyperdrive network sort of an internal detail that these applications are built on top of, which is sort of a web way of thinking, what if we instead said, no, this is an operating system, you have a file system, and you should be aware of those files. And once we asked that and started looking at how to build the thing like that, at some point we realized, wait a minute, we actually don't need pre-computed indexes. We can come up with a fast enough querying system on the file system to be able to write entire applications. And so that was kind of the last big piece where it was like, okay, now we like this. This is actually something that we want to use. Let's run with that. And so that's what we've been trying to kind of round out over the past, that kind of happened about a month ago is when we went a long way without it. Yeah. And we were just looking at the final thing and going, I don't really like it. This isn't very good,
That's a really good test. I mean, do I like it or not?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and you got to listen to yourself on that because it's like don't just run with it if it kind of stinks. So So now we threw away a lot of code, which feels great.
Oh yeah.
And I love doing that. And have been rebuilding it, and so now it's really a matter of wrapping up some of the protocol updates, which have taken a lot of work. So like the Hyperdrive protocol updates, and then wrapping up how the browser works. And I'm putting a lot of my work right now is kind of on finishing touches of a Files Explorer application, which is very core to how all this works. And so when I tell you it feels like a personal computing experience, I'm very serious. It's like an operating system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm standing here thinking Beaker OS.
Yeah, what do we call this thing?
That's a good question as well.
If you have any good ideas, let us know.
Yeah, but in a way, it still feels like a browser is kind of a good start because that's something people can relate to, and that's just in quotation marks a question of like dragging you in one step at a time. Until it like falls into place with file system, JavaScript, I write a query, I'm done.
Yeah, I think we're going to stick with browser as far as I know. We might try rebranding it as the Beaker network operating system, but that just doesn't quite feel right to me. I think it's a browser still, so we're probably going to stick with that. But it's just not the web browser
No, exactly. Not your father's web browser.
Yeah, all right, you just wrote our campaign.
Oh, sorry. So when this version comes out, will it have changed a lot, like visibly on when I just launch it and look around?
Yeah, it looks very different. There have been a lot of aesthetic updates, and unfortunately, it's basically a completely new iteration on the product. The protocol has so many breaking changes that we don't even think we can support the old data, and so we're hopefully gonna find a way to migrate the data, but we may need to even make a clean break entirely.
Yeah.
And I'm not at all enthusiastic about that, but that's where we're at right now, trying to balance the amount of time we have versus just getting this thing out, which is again already taken so long. So we're still kind of trying to decide, like, if so much of it is changing, and if it's not even backwards compatible, is it even right to maintain the brand, or should we start to call it something else? And we're still kind of making some decisions on that, but
I mean,
we'll
nobody
keep you updated.
Wants to get stuck in migrations either.
No, but also it feels terrible to throw away people's old work. That's
of course.
So I'm not in love with that situation, but we've got to work with the resources we got.
Yeah, of course, and I guess you already have a million ideas for how to move forward as well. So you just want to get this break over with as quickly as possible as well.
Right, pull the Band-Aid off. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But hopefully it'll be worth it. I think it's a pretty interesting update overall, and hopefully people will be able to focus on that and not on the pain of the change.
Yeah. I want to do cool stuff with it.
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah. So there should be more people out there. And yeah, I guess everything will become visible on Beaker browser on the website as well.
Oh, on the website, yeah. We'll make sure everybody knows what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And is the code for the new version visible out there already, or is it unwrapped?
It is. It's all on GitHub. It's in a very obtusely worded branch, so you would never know it. It's something like blue-hyperdrive 10, and it turns out that's our primary development branch. Hidden in plain sight. But
yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So if you wanted to try it, you could. It won't be a good time. I would definitely wait. But I think what we'll be doing in the next month or so is start to put together private builds and share that amongst some of the people we know, and then gradually work that out into a sort of a public pre-launch, and et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. And after that, things should be more stable, at least breakage-wise, moving forward, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I certainly don't think we're going to have to do a giant, major breaking change after this. I think our money would run out before that happened anyway, so... And that's a promise. I can stand by that.
Yeah. Was it a difficult time raising money for an idea like this? I mean, it's not a super obvious thing.
No, yeah. It would have been if we had not been paired up with Peter Wang, who is an amazing entrepreneur here in Austin, Texas.
Ah.
And he is actually just recently became the CEO of Anaconda, which is a Python data science platform.
Ah.
And we got matched up with him. I think he found us, actually. And he asked to get coffee, and Tara was still working on the project, so Tara got coffee with him and was like, you got to meet this guy. This guy's great. And so we went and got coffee and just hit it off in a big way. This is something that he has been personally interested in for a while, and he was looking for some way to participate. And so he helped us raise the angel round. He was the sort of the lead on that investment, and is now on the board.
Cool.
So we work very closely with Peter. We love Peter.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess in that way it's maybe a more natural idea because more people have been thinking about the same problems, I guess, from different directions.
Yeah, I think so. And, the money is definitely there because if you look at, for instance, IPFS, very similar what they're doing out there, and they raised just crazy money.
Oh.
Now, they did that off of ICO, which certainly helps.
Of course.
Yeah, and we have been pretty staunchly anti-cryptocurrency in this project. So we haven't had that, but they were successful in doing that, and so they were able to raise a lot of money and are putting it to use now.
Yeah.
So I think the interest is there. I think people are looking for ways to kind of break the current mold about how the web works in the same way that we are. So I think if we can hold fast on the project and kind of get to where we're trying to go, I think the money should be there. I don't think we're completely outside of the expectations of where money is right now, but
no,
we will see.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's exciting. It's kind of hard to put into words, but I feel like there should be a lot of exciting stuff to build on top of tech like this.
Yeah, I would hope so. And I feel like actually a lot of the industry is kind of sitting around and waiting for another opportunity to show up.
Mm-hmm.
If you look back at the past 30 years or so of Silicon Valley, you had personal computing, then you had the web, and then you had mobile. All three of those kind of kicked off the gold rushes of startups.
Yeah.
And then the mobile sort of cooled off around 2016 or so. And I think everybody's kind of just been sitting around going, all right, well, not really sure what to do next. I mean, a lot of B2B has kind of taken an uptick because that makes sense. There's always a pretty reliable set of opportunities, but certainly in the sort of the B2C world, there has not been a equivalent kind of gold rush as what the other platforms have given us. And so I would bet that VR, AR is certainly one of the things that will change that. But I think the other one is, I think the energy for where this has been in blockchains, and I just think blockchains are a similar premise, but less effective in their execution compared to what Hyperdrive
it's all ICOs or something.
Yeah, they certainly did create a platform for unregulated securities. And,
that's what we really needed.
Yeah, it was used. They had users.
Yes.
And now they're still sort of trying to get there to the endpoint. I don't, it's one of those things where I don't want to speak too concretely because who knows? Maybe one of those blockchains out there will figure it out. But my impression is that the model is. I'm very bearish on distributed ledger technology that has to have a decentralized consensus. So, proof of work, I think the energy usage is insane and just not tenable. Proof of stake, maybe they'll make it work. But even if you can make proof of stake work, you still are talking about a single database that's globally shared. So it's got inefficiencies built into it, which I just kind of question at the end of the day how effective that design is. But we will see.
Yeah, I mean, someone might figure it out.
Somebody might.
But still, I mean, it only took like 15 minutes of you explaining Beaker to me before I started feeling excited about, I can build stuff on this. I can see how I can do stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't get that after 15 minutes with the blockchain speakers, I tell you.
Yeah, I think the smart contract stuff is sort of interesting, to be sure.
Yeah, definitely.
And, I think that ends up being kind of where this rotates on is whether or not you distribute the client side or the server side in a way. So you could think of the Beaker model as saying, we're just going to move everything into the client, and so everything is going to be sort of distributed client-side applications, whereas the blockchains are all a distributed server-side application. So there's still one canonical set of state, there's still one canonical database, but it's sort of run over what I would really call sort of an automated cloud. You're scripting all of the different miners into running this cloud for you. And I don't know, I mean, I obviously appreciate the distribution of authority. I think that's something that everybody in this space is interested in, is finding a way to get away from this walled garden model of really big companies that hold all the authority over these networks. But as a product, blockchains kind of amount to competing with AWS. And I don't think that's a terribly compelling product, personally.
No, we're competing, just less efficiently.
Yeah, right. Are you tired of getting cheap cloud services? Well, we got a tool for you.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to get roasted. Somebody's going to find me on Twitter over this podcast and come at me hard.
Yeah, email me instead.
Yeah.
Paul has more important things to do.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
No, but I can't wait to see people start building stuff on top of this.
Yeah, I am really excited about this, and I'm really excited about finally finding a way to get away from the built-in indexes. That was kind of hanging over our heads. But this model of the file system, it's if maybe some people in the audience have ever read or looked into how Plan 9 works. We didn't set out to do this, but at the end of the day, the file system is a lot like the composed file system of Plan 9. And it's a really powerful set of tools because what you end up doing is sort of turning the folder structure into something which is semantically meaningful.
Yeah.
So, for example, because you are forming this file system against your kind of personal home root drive, you're composing together different folders at different locations, and those fixed locations are now meaningful. So, for instance, /public/friends anything inside of there is my friends, right?
Yep.
So the folder itself is now meaningful, and you can actually crawl the entire social graph by just recursing down that folder structure.
True.
So you could, list everybody in /public/friends, and then you descend into each of those drives, and then you descend into their friends folder, and then you list everybody there, and now you have the friends of friends, and so on and so on and so on. So this global file structure is semantically meaningful and pretty easy to understand, all told.
Yeah.
You're dealing with either assets like images or videos, or you're dealing with structured data like JSON, and so you're going to have to figure out how to tell people what the JSON should look like and identify the JSON. So there's a little bit of work around typing and things like that. But once you solve that, it's very, very straightforward how to build applications on that model. It's kind of merging the file system into a database.
Yeah.
And you could think of the folders as almost being table names in a way.
Yeah,
so,
it makes sense.
Yeah. I'm pretty encouraged by how straightforward that model is. I think that it's been hard to come up with a way to build applications on this that is easy to understand and easy to communicate.
Yeah.
And this now starts to feel like it's hitting that spot.
Yeah, and that, and I guess like things like access control and stuff like that, if you need it, can be sort of thought of as like folder permissions and stuff as well. Yeah,
and it's very immature at this stage. The ACLs,
later
they will. Yeah, it's we're very conscious of it, and it's on the to-do list. I mean, there's a number of things that we want to accomplish on that front, from at-rest encryption of these drives, all the way to sort of sophisticated multi-writer schemes, and so we. That will probably, once we manage to get the core of Beaker, out and available to people, it will be a lot of the work will probably be going into getting Hyperdrive more, adding power to Hyperdrive.
Yeah.
And hopefully everything that it constitutes the sort of experience is downstream of us, so that people will be able to build without waiting on us anymore, which is a positive, something we need to do.
It makes a lot of sense. But I mean, if it's natural that I might have my public friends folder over here, and then I might have my private friends folder over there, and I'm not publishing that one to anyone else, and that sort of makes it easy to think of for me as a user, at least, even if it might be technically tricky to solve.
Yeah. It's up to us to get those primitives done, but then once that's done, the folder structure should be very, very clear to people. It should be the sort of thing where you look at it and you go, oh yeah, okay, I like files now. This is a good thing.
I just need to be careful with my recursion in the friends folder.
Yeah, right. No inlet. You got don't run into a halting problem with that.
Always put a limit in.
Yes.
With sort of web scale recursion. Oh yeah, just a little thing. I saw you tweet just a few hours ago about the Qt toolkit running in the browser using WASM.
Yeah, isn't that neat?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that is really fascinating. That really stood out to me. It showed up on Hacker News today, and it was like, oh wow, that somebody actually did it. That it happened, because people have been saying with WASM for a long time the possibility of creating entirely new runtimes on the web built on WASM, and it's one of the things you go, yeah, that's interesting. And then somebody actually just took all of Qt, which, in case anybody doesn't know, it's a GUI toolkit for Unix, and they were able to port it entirely to WASM and run Qt UIs. And the performance was just fine. And it's weird in the ways that you would expect. You can't select text or right click on anything because everything has to be implemented by this kind of new GUI toolkit. But the possibility there is obviously pretty enormous.
Yeah, and there's a big base of both developers and code written already as well. I mean, it was fun. I saw this at a local C++ meetup. And because I had talked a little bit about WASM, or trying to understand WebAssembly, sort of hoping that C++ people could teach me as more of a web developer something, give me some insights or give each other insights. And we found this, and we opened the demo apps, and they were like, oh, this is the original cute demo GUI thing. I recognize this. It's all the same. But it's running in the browser.
Running in the browser. It's really wild, you know?
Yeah. And then you just interface that with the Beaker JavaScript objects, and off to the races.
Off to the races. You know, the thing that strikes me as really relevant about this is beyond just the sort of maybe that developers may take much more interest in having custom UI toolkits than anybody else, but beyond that sort of a novelty or what it might suggest, I again think that AR VR is going to become a pretty important thing in the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. And if we thought dealing with responsive was a pain, just wait. Good point. So, I don't know necessarily whether or not that connects to custom toolkits in WASM, but it certainly does suggest that the GUI toolkit of the web could be more in play than we expect in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that we're actually thinking about that with Beaker is that we have decided to very adamantly pursue a separation from data and presentation to a degree that I don't think ever has really been with the web. Because the idea with HTML was originally that it was meant to be purely content, no presentation in there, and I think in practice that's only somewhat true. You can appreciate the intent and the effort, but the reality is that there's a fair amount of opinion about presentation that's baked into any HTML page. Yeah. And if you want actually an example of a format that accomplishes that separation of content and presentation, the answer would be Markdown. Markdown is very, very unopinionated about presentation. And just think about it this way: if you're building a blog or a CMS or something like that, and you're asking yourself what format you want to store rich text inside your database, you're almost never going to use HTML. No. Because you know that it has presentation in there, and you want to be able to change your front end of your blog and not have like all of your old articles and blog posts like weirdly carry over old presentation, right? Yeah. So like that's kind of the intuition, I think, about whether or not something has really succeeded at separating presentation is, would you be okay with your CMS storing it in that format? And just HTML is just not the case. And so the way that we have been approaching that with Beaker is we're introducing an applications model in which you're visiting these drives, and they have files within them, and they include absolutely no presentation, no HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. They're simply containers of data, and they are typed. So this drive may identify itself as a photo album or as a podcast or things like that. And what the browser will do is it will dynamically inject another drive, which is presentation, an application drive that is matching with that type. And as a result, you now have a UI layer which is chosen entirely by the user at load time.
Yeah, so I choose my photo viewing application, basically.
Exactly, right.
Yeah, maybe. Which is something, sense.
Yeah, it's actually, like, when you think about it, it's like, we've been doing that with files for a long time. That seems like a pretty intuitive idea.
Yeah. Well, we sort of fell out of it with the web because, I don't know.
Because the web is somebody else's computer, Mm-hmm. It's all hard-coded up into somebody else's cloud and somebody else's walled garden. So now when you start to kind of disassemble the pieces, then it becomes pretty obvious. You're like, okay, well, why don't we have the applications, loaded separately? Mm-hmm. So the idea, I think, of having a much more dynamic front end is something that we probably, just as an industry, need to be getting ready for with VR, AR, and having a strong separation, like a real separation between the content and the presentation will be pretty important for accomplishing that. And so HTML is really, the way that we're viewing it is that you can still have, one of the types that's built into Beaker is just the website type, and that works in the way that you traditionally expect. It'll load up the index.html and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's really the only one. And everything else is expected to behave more like data. And I suppose actually applications will also use HTML. And so but HTML really is its UI language as far as we're concerned. You can try to use it just for rich text, sure, go ahead. But at the end of the day, if you want a strong guarantee that you're not going to get any presentation in there, you should just use Markdown. And that's one of the reasons we've built Markdown into the browser as well. So strong separation of data and presentation gives users much more control over their experience and prepares us for the kind of more dynamic future of VR AR. So net positive, we think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm super excited about VR as well. I play around with an Oculus Quest. I always want more applications, more exciting stuff.
I just keep on saying, give me 3 more years VR AR. I'm super excited about this, but I don't have time for this right now. I'm so busy with Beaker.
Yeah.
And I know I'm gonna have to retrain for whatever platform comes along, and I'm just okay, just one more time.
Yeah, but Firefox is on the Quest, so we have a nice browser there anyway.
Yes, we do, and it's been really fun to see what they're doing with that. I mean, I'll tell you, that's another reason why I've been waiting, is because they keep on putting out progress stuff that makes me go, oh man, that's gonna be great. I'm glad I don't have to spend time without that. So I'm not an early adopter when it comes to VR AR.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to more exciting stuff there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so this has been a super interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to more.
Yeah.
We mentioned a few topics that I've probably cut out of the episode just not to spoil it yet.
Yeah, another time.
So where should people go to find out more?
Well, you're going to see our year-old sort of information if you do this, but it's still a good way to get introduced to it. So if you head to beakerbrowser.com, we have a nice little website, show you everything that Beaker does. We also have a Twitter account for it, so @beakerbrowser. If you want a little more regular updates than the official account, you can follow me on Twitter. I like to tweet about it a lot. So @pfrazee, find me there. And we also hang out on Freenode in IRC. So if you ever wanted to just jump in, the pound DAT, DAT. That's where we hang out. So you can ping us there and
nice and simple.
Nice and simple.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you.
Hope to talk to you again soon.
Sounds great.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.